My name is James Hollis. I'm 42 years old, a former major in the U.S. Army. And 3 months ago, I was escorted off a secure military base like a stranger caught trespassing. Not because I failed my duty, not because I broke protocol. I was pushed out by my own father-in-law, a decorated general who once toasted me at my wedding. His exact words that day were, "You're not what this mission needs." Just like that, 15 years of service, multiple tours, 2 master's degrees in tactical logistics, gone. Scrubbed like a smudge on a whiteboard. It wasn't just the words that hit me, it was how cleanly it all happened. The HR form was already filled out, clearance already revoked, boxes already packed. There were 2 guards standing near the exit. Not because they needed to be, but because someone wanted them there. My team didn't look up when I walked by. A few glanced, then looked right through me like I'd been a ghost this whole time. Only one man, Lieutenant Brenner, met my eyes. His nod was small, but it said enough. He knew. Everyone did. Allison didn't speak a word when I got home. My wife, my partner, or at least she had been. She was sitting at the table with a legal pad and a pen, scribbling through some logistics diagram. She didn't even flinch when I walked in. There was a single envelope on the counter. Inside were housing options, storage units, and something that stung more than any battlefield wound, a bus schedule. She circled a line and said, "This one has better stops near the shelter." Her voice was cold, practiced, like she'd rehearsed it. I stood there, boots still dusty from the tarmac, wondering how long she'd been planning my exit. Wondering if the man who'd once told me I had potential had also written the memo that labeled me redundant. I didn't ask questions. I didn't raise my voice. I just grabbed the duffel. I never fully unpacked. The laptop I paid for with my own money, and the black notebook where I kept every concept they dismissed as overreach. As I closed the door behind me, I noticed the way the ceiling fan hummed above her, how nothing in that room had changed, like I had never been there at all. My truck smelled like old coffee and motor oil, and the silence on the drive felt heavier than armor. I didn't turn on the radio. I needed to sit with the fact that I had been erased from the inside, not by enemies, but by the very people who called me family. What hurts more than betrayal is knowing they never saw you as equal to begin with. I wasn't family. I was a placeholder, a soldier good enough to help when it suited them, easy enough to discard when my ideas didn't fit the chain of command. They dressed it up in performance reviews and language about mission fit, but it was always personal. I just didn't want to believe it. When I parked outside that cheap motel 2 miles from the base, I didn't feel angry yet. I felt numb. I sat for a while, engine ticking, watching the reflection of the red neon sign flicker on my windshield. And all I kept thinking was, they think I'll crawl back. They think I'll beg, but they don't know what I've built. They don't know what I've planned. And by the time they realize what they lost, it'll be too late. The first time I met Allison was at a military awards ceremony in Colorado Springs. It was late fall, just cold enough for the air to bite, but not enough to stop anyone from standing around outside in their dress blues. I remember the lights from the hangar casting long shadows on the tarmac and the smell of jet fuel clinging to the air like it always does after a flyover. I wasn't supposed to be there long, just a quick handshake and photo, then back to my base. She was standing alone near the coffee table, scrolling her phone like it was a shield. Her dress was simple, slate gray, nothing flashy. She looked like someone who'd grown up around medals and protocol and had long stopped being impressed by either. I didn't know who she was at first. I just knew there was something about the way she avoided eye contact with the generals that made her interesting. I asked if she'd tried the cookies. She smirked and said they looked like they'd been shipped in bulk. That's how it started. We sat on a bench just outside the main hall, where the sound of the band was muffled enough that you could actually talk. She asked what unit I was with, but she already knew. Said she'd seen my name in the program. I asked if she was military, and she laughed quietly. "No," she said. "I'm the daughter they try not to quote in interviews." That was the first time I saw the crack in her armor. There was something sharp in the way she spoke, but it wasn't meant to hurt. It was just how she kept people from getting too close. I understood that. We talked for over an hour about strategy, books, growing up with too much pressure. She said her father once made her redo a history paper because she cited an article instead of a primary source. I told her about the time I got chewed out for using the wrong acronym in a mission brief. We laughed. It felt easy. That night, I walked her to her car and watched her drive off before heading back to the barracks. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt that grounded around someone. She saw through the uniform without dismissing what it meant. And for a long time, I believed she was the only one who did. Maybe that's why it cut so deep when everything changed. Because I didn't just lose my wife, I lost the version of her I once trusted with everything I had. After we got married, General Carter offered me a position in his unit's strategic division. It sounded like a promotion, a show of trust. But deep down, I knew it was something else. It wasn't about my record or my ideas. It was about keeping me close, where he could see me, manage me, limit me. I was married to his daughter, but in uniform, I was still just another line item under his command. The office I got looked impressive on paper. Corner view, 2 assistants, access to data that most officers would kill for, but every memo I sent had to be cleared. Every proposal I wrote was quietly buried or edited until it sounded like someone else's. The generals would thank me in private but present my ideas as theirs in the meetings that mattered. And if I pushed back, I was told to remember who signed the orders. Respect the chain. At home, it wasn't much better. Allison stopped asking me how my day went. Conversations turned into briefings. If I brought up an issue, she'd suggest I was being dramatic or not seeing the big picture. She always said her father had a plan. Always. And when I asked her what that plan was, she'd just say, trust the process. But I knew the process. I'd seen it. It was a cage disguised as structure. What got to me the most wasn't the surveillance or the endless reviews. It was the way they praised me with conditions. You're doing good work, James, but tone it down. Don't ruffle the majors. Don't bring too much attention to yourself. They loved my results, but not my voice. They wanted the soldier, not the man. Even the dinners at the Carter house felt like inspections. I'd sit across from men who wore medals they hadn't earned the hard way and get asked about loyalty, image, optics. Never about truth. Never about cost. They'd raise a toast to service while stabbing at roast beef, then remind me to keep my emails clean and my interviews brief. I stopped being James to them. I was a symbol, useful only if I stayed in line. You'd think being family might soften the edges. But in that house, family meant performance. It meant staying silent when I should have spoken, smiling when I should have questioned. I was a husband in name, a strategist on paper, but always a subordinate in practice. No matter how hard I worked, I was never one of them. Just tolerated, just temporary. It started with a slide deck. A logistics redesign proposal I had written over weeks of late nights and base coffee, buried in data, building something lean and sharp. Then I saw it again. Same graphs, same language, same sequence. Only this time, it was someone else presenting it. A junior officer with smoother edges and better connections. My name wasn't on the file, no credit, no mention, just a nod to the division for collaborative insight. I took it home that night, not just the sting of being erased, but the weight of realization. This wasn't a mistake. It was policy. Someone had made a decision about what I was worth. Allison was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with that kind of quiet focus she used when she didn't want to talk. I told her what happened. She didn't ask for details, just said, the chain of command sees the bigger picture. Then she added something that made me stop breathing. Optics matter, James. That word became the wedge. It kept showing up. Optics, command alignment, legacy protection. These weren't terms she used before. Now they were sewn into every conversation like code. I'd say we were losing sight of function, and she'd say, stay in scope. I'd mention performance gaps, and she'd ask if I was sure I understood the directive. There were no arguments, just adjustments, Micro-corrections that made everything feel wrong. A shift in tone. A drift in trust. I stopped sharing my drafts. Started writing in notebooks again, the old-school way. At work, I felt the eyes. Meetings got shorter when I entered the room. Feedback got lighter but colder. One morning, I found a request in my inbox to submit all ongoing documents to a central access point. For transparency. I knew what that meant. Surveillance, control. At home, I started noticing how often Allison's phone lit up with unnamed messages. How she took calls on the balcony with her back to the door. Her answers got vague. Her smile distant. She said she was tired. Said work was demanding, but I could feel it. There was a silence between us that used to be comfort. Now it was a wall. I tried to push through. I offered to cook, left small notes like I used to. Nothing changed. One night, I found a copy of my proposal, marked up, annotated in someone else's handwriting. It had been printed from her work email. When I asked, she didn't deny it. Just said, "You knew the system when you joined." I don't know what I expected. Maybe shock. Maybe regret. But all I saw was resignation. She'd chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. The house felt colder after that. I started sleeping in the guest room, telling myself it was just for space, just until things cooled off. But they never did. Her father stopped acknowledging me in meetings. Invitations to leadership briefings stopped arriving. I was left managing outdated logistics flowcharts while others reaped the credit from frameworks I built. I wasn't losing. I was being erased, bit by bit. Quietly, I began locking my devices, changing passwords, hiding my notebooks under false files. Not because I had something to hide, but because I had something to protect. My thoughts were no longer safe under this roof. Neither were my plans. Allison still kissed me goodbye in the mornings, but it felt scripted. Like she was playing a part she no longer believed in. She once told me that her biggest fear was not having control over her life. I think about that a lot. About how control became her armor, her compass, even when it pointed away from me. She wasn't malicious, just methodical. And in that method, I became a variable she no longer knew how to justify. There were nights I sat in the truck, parked a few blocks away from the house, just to think clearly. The silence out there felt more honest than the one inside. It was in those moments that I started sketching a plan. Not for revenge. Not even for justice. Just for survival. For dignity. For something I could still call mine. When the silence got too heavy, I started building. Not for the base. Not for them. For me. I called it OwlNet. A real-time logistics engine designed to shift battlefield supply chains without waiting on human input. It learned from errors, studied terrain, anticipated choke points before they happened. It didn't need permission to adapt. It just worked, and every single line of code came from my hands. I wrote it at night, alone, with a thermos of black coffee and a worn-out laptop I never connected to the base network. No backups on cloud drives, no sharing, no notes lying around. Just pen, paper, muscle memory. I'd draft the logic in notebooks that I hid inside hollowed-out manuals, then transfer the architecture to a secure drive. It took months, long ones, but it gave me something no one else could touch: control. I registered IronTact LLC in Delaware using a mailing address 3 states away. Kept the ownership clean. No digital fingerprints. Then, I filed a provisional patent, the kind most people skip over without reading. Section 12B. If the creator is subject to internal sabotage or suppression, the license suspends automatically. It wasn't vengeance, it was insurance. At the office, I played the role they gave me. The silent workhorse, the loyal son-in-law. But every time they stole another piece of my strategy, I added another feature to OwlNet. Load balancing, fuel optimization, dynamic rerouting under fire. Bit by bit, I turned the Shadow project into a complete ecosystem, one they didn't even know existed. I named the modules after birds. Hawkview for drone-integrated field scans. Finchstack for inventory compression. Raven Pulse for threat adaptive reallocation. It made me smile sometimes, the irony of it. They called me a soldier who couldn't see the big picture, but I was building the map behind their backs. All of it sat behind one encrypted gate. Mine. I didn't tell anyone. Not my team. Not my brother. Not even the few friends I still trusted. The fewer who knew, the cleaner the hand. And when it was ready, I wrote the clause that mattered most. Bad faith voids consent. I printed it, read it out loud, then folded it into my wallet. They thought I was beaten. They thought I'd been turned into a ghost. But ghosts don't disappear. They wait. They build. They haunt the system until the locks give way. They always skip to the numbers, the line items, the graphs and projections. That's where their attention lived. But the real weapon was buried in the license. Section 12B. A plain line written without legal flourish. If the creator is treated in bad faith, all rights to continued deployment are suspended. No appeal, no court battle. Just lights out. I didn't breach a contract. I enforced one. They thought owning the battlefield meant owning the system. But OwlNet was never theirs. It lived under iron tact, under my name, built from nights they never saw and mornings they never earned. The clause wasn't revenge. It was consequence. I waited until 2 days before the renewal, logged in from a nondescript motel halfway between bases, a place with buzzing lights and no questions at the counter. The interface asked, "Confirm auto-renew." I clicked no. Then I saved the change and logged out. That was it. No explosion, no hacking, just a silent shift in control. Validation checks started failing 36 hours later. Not all at once. First a delay in field distribution. Then missed syncs with satellite movement. The system didn't crash. It just stopped cooperating. Requests timed out. Adjustments got ignored. And slowly, quietly, the network unraveled like thread pulled from a uniform. Emails started piling in. Questions, escalations, texts blaming glitches, command whispering about sabotage. I didn't answer. There was nothing to explain. Everything was functioning exactly as I designed it. When misused, it protects itself. That's the logic of trust written into every line of code. They never imagined a soldier could write law into software. That a strategist could hide the final play inside a contract. They called me insubordinate once. Said I didn't understand the bigger mission. But all I ever wanted was clarity. Respect. Ownership of what I built. Now they were chasing shadows in systems they never understood. Trying to plug holes they pretended didn't exist. I wasn't watching them fall. I was just watching them notice what they'd ignored. That's not vengeance. That's gravity. I drafted the formal notice the next morning. Suspension pending due to breach of good faith. Sent it to their legal unit, CC'd the one who once called me a liability. I didn't sign it with anger. I signed it with silence. And let the system speak for itself. The day after the system stalled, my phone didn't stop ringing. First it was majors, then colonels, then an old friend from CENTCOM who hadn't called me since the promotion I never got. They all wanted to know the same thing. What happened to OwlNet? Why wasn't it syncing? Why did reroutes start failing on the western corridors? I didn't answer most of them. Let the silence do the talking. By noon, the Pentagon called. Not an aide. Not a liaison. Direct from the Joint Chiefs office. That was the moment I knew the message had landed where it needed to. They didn't ask. They pleaded. We need it stabilized. We need it back. I took notes on what they said. But I didn't promise anything. That wasn't the deal anymore. If they wanted the system, they would have to acknowledge who built it. No more shadows, no more borrowed credit. Just truth. The call from General Carter came at 3:14 p.m. I let it go to voicemail, played it back once, then again. His voice was calm, calculated, a hint of regret, maybe, but not enough to matter. He asked to talk, man to man, offered reinstatement, resources, even mentioned the Medal of Honor Review Board. He didn't get it. This wasn't about a desk or a plaque. It was about ownership, integrity. A man's work should not be separated from his name. I called him back an hour later. Spoke slow, clear, no anger, just terms. Public recognition of the intellectual property. Contractual adjustments reflecting market value. Written board minutes stating the system's origin. No negotiation behind closed doors, no salvaging optics, no family favors. If they wanted OwlNet, they would take it with the truth it was built on. He pushed back, said I was being inflexible, that national security was at stake. I paused, then told him something he wasn't ready to hear. National security doesn't live in a system, it lives in the people who build it. And I was one of those people. They just forgot. He went quiet for a long time. Then he asked if I was trying to destroy his legacy. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I told him I wasn't after legacy. I was after clarity. He had chosen silence when it suited him. Now, I was choosing accountability. The call ended without an agreement. But the power had shifted, not in noise, not in rank, in truth. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing validation. I was setting terms. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of weight. The weight of history correcting itself. That evening, I walked to a small diner near my apartment, ordered coffee and sat by the window. No uniform, no salute, just a man who knew his value. The Pentagon could wait. The general could wait. For once I had time. And that was the real victory. After leaving the base, I didn't look back. I joined a small startup founded by a former Army officer who understood what it meant to build and trust a team. From the first day, they treated me as a partner, not a subordinate. I had a title, yes, but more importantly, I had autonomy. OwlNet 2.0 was mine to develop, refine, and deploy. No approvals beyond logic. No politics, no favors, no hidden agendas. Just results. I spent late nights integrating real-time data from 3 regional outposts. Each test made the system smarter. Routes optimized, supply lines efficient, troop movements anticipated, fuel usage cut by significant percentages, and detention errors dropped. Soldiers on the ground started noticing the change. Dispatchers who had stayed up late correcting mistakes no longer needed to. The system was thinking ahead for them, the way it should have from the start. The best moment wasn't in a boardroom. It was standing in a hangar, watching logistics officers use OwlNet for the first time without a single prompt from me. They adjusted flows, saved hours, and grinned when the system flagged choke points they hadn't expected. It was subtle. No headlines, no recognition from the brass. But in those smiles, in the gratitude, from people doing their jobs better, I felt it. Validation doesn't always come in awards. Sometimes it comes quietly, in results that matter. 3 months later, I was asked to speak at a military tech conference. The organizers had titled my slot Legal Victory and System Recovery. I declined. Instead, I renamed it Owning Your Work. I wanted to tell a room full of officers, engineers, and analysts that recognition isn't about public ceremonies or press releases. It's about making sure the people who build, maintain, and operate systems have the authority and credit to do it well. The applause wasn't the point. The lesson was, I also made time for mentoring. Tuesday mornings, I invited mid-career analysts who had been labeled rigid or slow to adapt. We pored over real-world logistics problems. No slides, no scripted lectures, just conversation and guidance. I listened more than I spoke, and I learned from them as much as they learned from me. One young officer named Darius had developed a small routing tool in his free time. We expanded it together, integrating it into OwlNet 2. Watching him light up when he realized his work mattered gave me a warmth that no recognition from General Carter could ever provide. A few months later, my mother came to visit the office. She walked past rows of desks, glanced at whiteboards, and then stopped at my workspace. She looked around carefully and said, "It feels right in here." Simple words, but heavy with meaning. I hadn't realized how much I carried from those years at the base. The weight of being undervalued, overlooked, and controlled. In that moment, I felt it lift. Life returned to normal in ways I hadn't expected. I wasn't chasing after the system I once lost. I was refining it, improving it, and letting those who operated it see its full potential. Emails from former colleagues who had tried to reach me were ignored. The past didn't matter. What mattered was what I built, what I maintained, and who benefited from it. Sitting at my desk one evening, sipping coffee and watching data flow in real time, I realized I was finally free. Free from expectations that had never been mine. Free from oversight that had never been earned. Free from family politics, masquerading as mentorship. Freedom wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady, and present in every decision I made and every line of code I wrote. This was the life I wanted long before the boardroom, long before the threats, long before the list on the counter. It was the life I had reclaimed, and now, for the first time in decades, I could call it mine.